the faint scrape of bare feet on cold marble. Year 89 CE, you're standing inside a Roman atrium, pressed against the wall with 6 other silent witnesses. You are not allowed to move. You are not allowed to speak. Your only purpose tonight is to watch. In the center of the room, an 18-year-old girl stands perfectly still beneath a bridal veil. Before her rests an object draped in dark cloth. Behind her waits a physician, his leather bag heavy with instruments that clink softly when he shifts his weight. Beside him stands an elderly woman gripping the girl's arm with a firmness that makes the message unmistakable. There is no escape. Not for the girl. Not for you. That morning, the girl's mother had braided her daughter's hair while sobbing, deep, shaking sobs she tried to hide behind her hand. Her final advice, whispered like a curse, had been the same warning Roman mothers had passed down for centuries. Do not resist. Whatever they require, do not resist. It only makes everything worse. Now the girl reaches forward. Her fingers tremble as she lifts the cloth, revealing the object beneath. It is carved from dark wood, polished to a glossy sheen by the touch of countless brides before her. The moment her eyes recognize it, all color drains from her face. But what she doesn't know, what she cannot yet imagine, is that this statue is only step 1. After this comes the physician's examination. After that comes the witnessed consummation. And after that comes the documentation that legally records her body as transferred property. For nearly 1,000 years, every Roman bride endured this sequence. Every Roman mother rehearsed that same whispered warning. And when Christianity eventually conquered Rome, they erased the entire ritual so thoroughly that almost no one today realizes it ever existed. Stay with me, because what you're about to uncover has been buried for nearly 2 millennia, and by the end, you'll understand exactly why someone wanted it forgotten. This is the truth about Roman wedding nights and the ritual they tried to wipe from history. If this story grips you, hit like. It takes a second and helps us pull more forgotten voices out of the dark. Now, let's return to that atrium. Back to the veiled girl, back to the instant before everything in her life changed. Her name was Flavia Tirsa, 18 years old, the daughter of a minor Roman official who had spent 3 long years negotiating this marriage. Her groom, Marcus Petronius Rufus, was a grain merchant, 43, wealthy, respectable, and strategically connected. Flavia had met him exactly 3 times. She felt no affection for him. But in Rome, affection had nothing to do with marriage. Marriage was contract law, a merger of families, a property transfer. And Flavia was the property being transferred. That morning, the procession leading her to the temple had been beautiful in its own ceremonial way. She wore the traditional flame-colored veil, her hair arranged in 6 precise braids tied with wool ribbons, just as generations of brides before her had done. At the temple, priests sacrificed a sheep and examined its entrails for omens. The signs were favorable. The gods approved. Her father then signed the marriage contracts using the ancient formula that made the union legally binding. Flavia recited the ritual vow passed down through centuries. Ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia. Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia. The words meant one thing. She was no longer legally herself. Her identity was dissolved and rewritten in her husband's name. She belonged to Marcus now. But the temple ceremony was only the legal beginning. What waited at the end of the torchlit procession, inside the house she had never entered, before witnesses already gathering in its atrium, that was where the real transformation occurred. As she walked through the streets, crowds sang songs. Not blessings, not gentle hymns, obscene songs, explicit graphic verses describing exactly what would happen to her that night. Young men shouted suggestions crude enough to burn her cheeks beneath the veil. Old women cackled as they threw walnuts at her, a fertility blessing that felt more like mockery. Her mother walked beside her, silent, rigid, staring straight ahead with a clenched jaw and hollow eyes. Flavia had hoped for comfort. Instead, her mother looked like a woman awaiting an execution. That morning, as her mother pinned the final braid, she had broken down. Not soft tears, violent, shuddering sobs she tried to smother with her hand. When Flavia asked what was wrong, her mother's answer came in a hoarse whisper. Do not resist. Whatever they ask of you tonight, do not resist. It only makes everything worse. Flavia had thought she understood wedding nights, the pain, the awkwardness, the fear, but she had no idea what truly awaited her. By the time the procession reached Marcus's house, the sun had vanished. 2 torches burned at the doorway, the traditional markers declaring a marriage would be consummated inside according to law. Marcus waited there to lift her over the threshold. The gesture was symbolic. A bride must not stumble when entering her new home. But everyone knew the custom came from something older, from a time when brides didn't walk into their husbands' houses. They were carried, willing or not. Inside, Flavia saw shadows moving, too many of them. Far too many for what she imagined would be a private moment between husband and wife. She was wrong. Count them with her. An elderly woman in ceremonial robes, the pronuba. Her role was to supervise every part of the night and provide legal testimony if the marriage was ever disputed. A priest whose affiliations were unclear, his face half lost in lamplight. 3 female slaves holding basins of water and stacks of clean cloths. An older man near a leather medical bag, its metal instruments faintly glinting. And in the corner, draped in dark fabric, a wooden structure nearly 4 feet tall. Too many people, too many eyes. The pronuba stepped forward and seized Flavia's hands. Her grip was strong, almost restraining. "Welcome to your husband's home," she said. "The sacred rites must now be completed. Here is the truth almost no one tells you about Roman marriage. It was not romantic. It was not intimate. It was not about building a life together. It was a legally documented property transfer. Roman law described marriage as conventio in manum, literally coming into the hand. The bride passed from her father's legal control into her husband's. Early Roman husbands held the same power over wives that they held over slaves, including the right of life and death. By Flavia's era, the harshest edges had softened, but the core remained. Marriage transferred a woman from one man's authority to another, and like any property transfer in Rome, it required verification. Think of how Romans sold land. Witnesses observed, the boundaries were inspected, rituals were performed, documents sealed. They applied this exact logic to marriage. A bride's value lay in her ability to produce legitimate heirs. Her body was the property being transferred. Her fertility was the resource being purchased. So the law required 2 things. Her virginity had to be confirmed, and the consummation had to be witnessed. These requirements shaped rituals that made logical sense to Romans, even as they horrify us today. The pronuba now guided Flavia toward the draped figure in the corner. Flavia's heart hammered so violently, she could hear the pulse in her ears. The pronuba's hand tightened around her arm, steering her forward, leaving no room for retreat. "You must greet Mutunis Tutunis," the pronuba instructed. "You must ask his blessing before your husband approaches." Flavia reached out and pulled the cloth away. Underneath stood a polished wooden phallus, shaped with deliberate anatomical precision. And she finally understood why her mother had cried. This was not a small charm like the protective amulets Roman children wore to ward off evil. This was not decoration. This was not symbolic in the way modern historians sometimes wish it were. The statue stood nearly 4 feet tall, carved from dense, dark wood and polished smooth by generations of use. Its proportions were intentional, its purpose unmistakable. The Pranuba began explaining, calmly, clinically, what Flavia was required to do. Mutunis Tutunis, she said, was the god of fertility and sexual initiation. Before a bride could be lawfully approached by her husband, she had to offer herself first to the god. It was tradition. It was duty. It was required. We know Mutunis Tutunis existed because ancient writers mention him. Always briefly, always uncomfortably. No one lingers on the details unless they are condemning them. In the 5th century, as Christianity tightened its grip on Rome, St. Augustine described the ritual with open outrage. Roman brides, he wrote, were made to sit upon the wooden phallus of Mutunis Tutunis as a sacred obligation before consummation with their husbands. The ritual was performed publicly in front of witnesses. Augustine was a hostile source, writing to denounce pagan customs. But his account aligns with earlier, non-Christian fragments. Lactantius called the practice so shameful that merely naming it polluted the speaker. Arnobius went further, describing brides straddling the god's emblem while their new husbands looked on. Even Varro, writing centuries earlier with no Christian agenda, referenced Mutunis Tutunis as a deity to whom brides were presented, using language that carefully avoided explicit description while still implying physical